Hi guys, this is Adetayo, and today I want to talk about how you can migrate your data from on-prem MS SQL to Snowflake's warehouse using Azure Data Factory as our integration runtime. Please stay tuned. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In our previous class, we've successfully migrated our data from MS SQL to Azure Data Lake. Now, in today's video, we'll be migrating our data from ADLS2 to Snowflakes. But before we start, this is how we're going to do it. First, we'll migrate a single table to see how we can move our data from ADLS2 to Snowflakes. And then we'll now do it in a way that we can migrate all our tables at once with a single click from ADLS2 to Snowflakes. Let's go on and let's dive into it. So first of all, let's review our architecture once again and see how it looks like. These are all the data that we've migrated from MS SQL to Snowflakes. You can see all the data, all the tables, all the data are sitting at our environment and our ADLS. So to go back, this is the migration template architecture. First, we move to our staging environment, which is Azure Data Lake, and now we'll be moving to Snowflakes. So how are we going to go about it? Like I said, the first thing we'll do, we'll migrate a single table, and once we've been able to migrate a single table successfully, we'll now migrate all the tables at once. So in our data journey, the first thing we need to do is to create our Snowflake's environment. Let's get into it. If you are yet to set up your Snowflake's account, please go to Snowflake's website and set up your account for free. You set it up for 30 days free. So let's get into this. You fill in your details, and once you fill in your details and you click on continue, and once you click on this, you fill in every details that you need to fill in, and then you click on AWS, and then you click on get started. And once you've done this, you'll receive an email that will tell you what you need to do. You can skip all of this. After all that, you'll receive an email where you need to fill in your username and your password. So give it a username and provide your password and click on get started. Once you've done with that, you'll see something like this. Once everything loads up, you'll see your landing page like this, where you can see you see your workspace, my workspace, where you can create your worksheet and all that. You will see the monitoring tab, which is the activity tab, where you can see the history of your queries, and you can see the project environment, where you can create your worksheet. So you click on workspace, and once you're done with that, you create your first worksheet. Create something like this. Where you can name it. You can call it ADLS2 to Snowflake's migration. Once you've created this, so the reason why we are creating this is to have all our query script in a single worksheet. so that if you to recall your query tomorrow, for every of the activity that you are doing, you can always reference back to your save worksheet. So this is very easy for you. It makes your work easier. It makes your environment neat to track. So the first thing we need to do is to create the database that we'll be working with. And in that, we create a database. Say create database. So let's call it our migration work. Migration work. And then you select it and execute. Once you've done that successfully, you can refresh your workspace. You can refresh your workspace and this is down here. So you click on refresh button and then boom. So you can see we've successfully created our database that we'll be using for this migration journey. So the next thing we need to do is to create our schema. In creating our schema, you do create schema. We call it migration. Yes. Migration. And then you execute. You can see we've successfully created our schema that we'll be using for this journey. Let's remember in MS SQL by default, the schema is created, but here you have to create your schema. So now that we've created our database and we've also created our schema, so it's time for us to migrate all our tables from ADLS to Snowflakes. So this database we'll be migrating it into is the migration work database. So let's get started. Now, before we continue, let's review our architecture once again. Our current architecture, which we're following, is this. So we've successfully moved our data to Azure Data Lake, which is sitting right here in our Azure environment. But now, so what are the steps that we need to take before we migrate the data into Snowflakes? The first step is to create a table that will be migrating the data from. So that means we need to create table in our Snowflakes environment. And the next step is to copy this CSV file that are sitting here and use the copy command to move them into Snowflakes. So which means we need to connect the Azure URL to our Snowflakes environment. So let's see how we're going to do all that. Like I said, first part of the architecture is to create our database. So, and then we'll do the rest dynamically. Before we continue, let's try and get more understanding about how Snowflakes understand how we do and does migration. You can go to the documentation of Snowflakes. You can read more on Snowflakes data migration, where you can get every of the topic that you need to understand more on Snowflakes in this environment. So you can go to the documentation and then you'll see all the tutorials all the guides that you need. This will help you understand more on how Snowflake handle the connection with ADLS2 and other services like Amazon and the rest. So let's get started. So the first thing, like I said, is to create an external stage. So okay, for us to get started, we need to first create an external stage. So, but if you're new or if you're not familiar with how stages is being created in Snowflake, you need to go to the documentation and read more on stages. You need to go to Azure to Snowflake's documentation and read more on stages for you to have a better understanding of how stages works. We have two types of stages. One is an internal, and the other one is external. So the internal stages from the Snowflakes and the second external stage are the stages that the containers that we have from the Azure environment or Amazon. The AWS S3 buckets. So in our own case, in today's class, since we are using Azure storage, we'll be defining as Azure external storage. So to do that, the first thing we need to do is to go to Azure storage where we have our files seated on and copy the Azure storage URL. So for you to get that, you go to the properties, you'll see the Azure URL at the top, which is here, and you click on copy. So once you copy the URL, you go back to Snowflake. You come here, you go to data, and then you click on the schema, which we've created, which is migration schema. And once you click on the migration schema, you click on create, which is at the top. Click on the drop down and you'll see stage. You can see the stages that we have here. We have Amazon MS3, we have the Microsoft Azure, and we are using Microsoft Azure for this. So you click on Microsoft Azure. So you give the stage a name. So let's call it migration. You paste the URL and you click on authentication. And then you click on credentials. So now it's asking for Azure SaaS token. So you go back here, you see it here, share access token. And then you click on it. And then you generate your access token. To generate that, make sure you configure this. And the first thing is store access policy, leave that as none. The permission, you need to select all the permissions that you have here. And I'll tell you why, because if you don't select all of these permissions that you want to grant, by the time you want to load the migration, it will throw error. So it's better to select it, else you might come back and select it once again. You can select the start time and the end time that you want the token to last, so you can have control over the token. So start date and you can also set the time and when you want the token to expire. So let's say I want this token to expire in a week's time. And then you click on generate. Once you do that, then you click on copy. So once you copy your token, you go back. and paste it here in Snowflake. And then you click create. All right, this is successful. Then go back to your worksheets. So let's take this text. You click list and you click the name of your stage, which is migration at migration, and you execute. So don't forget, during our last class, I created two folders where we have our migrated data, which is what we have here, venture work. We have it. So you can also reference the name of the folder just in case you have more than one storage path. So migration / online migration underscore data. Execute. So there you go. So you can see all the files from here. So, but in case you have any error, just know you go back to the SAS token. Just in case you have any error. So all you need to do is to give the permission for the SAS token. And once you give the permission, you go back and then you edit the Snowflake. Click on migration. Go to your staging area and edit. Click on the migration at the stages and then click on edit, and then you supply the new fresh token and then you save just in case. And once you're done with that, you go back to your worksheet and you execute the command again. So you can see the files are there and then there's no error, so you're good to go. So now, like I said in our architecture earlier, the first part is to create a table and then we copy. So let's create the create table statement, because currently we don't have any table in our migration work database. So we can go back to SQL Server and see which of the tables that we need to migrate, which is the files that we have here. We can pick any of the files that we have and decide which one to pick. So once we head back to MS SQL database, these are the list of tables that are waiting for us to migrate. So you can pick any of the table that we have here. For instance, let's pick the organization, which is what we have here. So in this table, you can see the columns 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 columns. So, and First thing first, let's create the table. So this is it. So it's to create the table first, and you click to select the query, and you click execute. We've successfully created our table, so you can click on refresh. So you can see we've created our tables in our migration schema, so which is what we have here. So now, once that the table has been created, let's execute the copy command. You can get the copy command in the documentation. So what we are copying into our DIM organization, and the file that we are saying that you should go back into migration folder and look for the file DIM organization and copy it into the database. Once we've successfully created our table, so the next thing is to copy the file. So the first thing is to use the copy command, which means we are copying into our DIM organization table that we created, and we are saying it should go into the migration folder and look for the file called DIM organization to copy into it. So let's execute. You can see we have an error here. So we need to specify the file format that file is, and how do we know that? So we go back and get the file format. So we can do a quick preview of our file, which is DIM organization, which is this. Do preview. We'll see that the files are comma separated from the values, and are also enclosed in all these quoted quotes, and we have to define all this in our file format in Snowflake. For us to do this, so let's go back to Snowflake. And we'll define the file format similar to how we'll define it in staging. So let's go to the worksheet tab. Select the migration. Worksheet tab. Click on create. File format. And then we do create the file format. So we are saying it should create the file format. So the name of the file format that we are creating is called the migration format. The type is CSV, and the delimiter, as you can see here, is comma separated. And it should skip the first row, which is the header. Which is the first one, which is the header, and it should also field optionally enclosed by this, which handles the field with values. So once we're done with this, we click Create. Then you go back to your worksheet. And add the file format option at the end of it all. It is file format. It is file underscore format. And the name of the file format, which we created earlier. And then you click copy and you execute. With this now, we've successfully loaded the data from our DIM organization into Snowflake. And you can see the number of rows loaded is 14, which is the same number that we have in our MS SQL. So we've successfully loaded our first stage, which is loading into Snowflake. So for you to do this, you can confirm what we've loaded and query the table, which is the organization. They'll select and execute. You can see all our tables have been migrated successfully. Congratulations. So we're on the first stage of our data migration into Snowflake. Okay, so now that we've created our table successfully, so the next thing for us to do is to try and copy the data into our table. So you can see the copy command. You're copying into the organization, and we're checking for the organization file in our ADLS environment. So we run it and execute. So we can see that we have an error which is saying numeric value in organization key is not recognized. And yeah, so what we need to do is to tell Snowflake the value of our comma of our parameter that we are using to separate the file. So how do we get that? If you go back to the migration part, you will see the file that the parameter that we are using to separate the file. So we are using a comma parameter. So which is the comma separated value, which is what we are using to separate our file. And also, if you look at it, we have this quote. We separate each of the parameter from one another. So we need to specify all this. So let's go back to Snowflake and create our file formats. So now that we are back in Snowflake, we'll define our file formats. So how do we go back? So you go to your Database Explorer, go to your Migration tab, click on Stage, and you do Create. So you create the file format. So in defining our file formats, for our staging environment. So create file formats. The type is CSV, which is what we have here as our file type. Which is in CSV format. And we are saying you should skip the first header. So field optional enclosed by quotes, which is this. And then we click on create. So once you've created, so you go back to your worksheet. And once you've created your file format, you have the option of file format. You have the option of file format into the copy command that you have. File format. Equals to the name of the file which we created. Dot. Once we've created that, then we click on copy. So with this now, we've successfully migrated our data into Snowflake. As you can see also, we have 14 rows migrated, which is the same amount of rows that we have in our MS SQL. To confirm what we've migrated, you can query the table and you select and execute. As you can see, we've successfully migrated our table from MS SQL to Snowflake perfectly. So once we've done this, in our next class, we'll be showing how you can dynamically move all the tables from ADLS2 to Snowflake. So in that aspect, we'll be creating all the tables dynamically, and then we'll also copy the data from ADLS2 into Snowflake. So let's get started. Welcome back. So now we're going to migrate the data from ADLS2 to Snowflake dynamically. So before we start, let me give you a quick recap on what we are doing. So we're moving our data from ADF, from Snowflake, from Azure Data Lake to Snowflake. So the first part we've done is we've manually moved the data from which we created one data from ADLS2 to Snowflake, where we created our table manually, and we also moved the data using the copy parameter into our table, which we also confirm here. But now, what we're going to do now is we're done with the manual setup. We are going to create and copy it in a way that it will be a dynamical setup. And we're going to create and copy at the same time. so that with that, we'll be able to move our data from Azure Data Factory, create the new pipeline, and move it into Snowflake. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to clone our pipeline and test. So this is the pipeline that we created earlier where we use for moving our data into ADLS2. So let's clone this. So let's call it okay. So now that we have cloned our pipeline, so all we need to do is click on the edit button here, delete this copy icon, and the first activity that we're going to use is lookup. Hi guys, welcome back to our data migration journey. So we're going to do a full migration of all our tables from ADLS2 into Snowflake dynamically. But before we start, let's do a quick recap. So currently, what we've done is we've been able to create our table in Snowflake, and also we've copied the file into our table, which is a single table. But now, what we're going to do now is we want to create a dynamic, we want to create the data movement dynamically, whereby we'll move our data from ADLS2 into Snowflake. But before we start, let's go through the architecture one more time. So during the migration, we review the file type that we are moving, and how we can manage the delimiter in the data type. So which is what we've done. And in the process, we were able to create the migration format that we use for the data migration. So now we're going to create the remaining process dynamically whereby we create the remaining tables, and we also copy the files into Snowflake. So what we'll be doing now is just to pass the parameters dynamically, and it will create and copy the data table at the same time. It will create and copy the data at the same time. So let's go to the Azure Data Factory and create our new pipeline. So we can copy my pipeline that we created in Azure Data Factory earlier on. Right click on it, you'll see clone it to copy it, give it a name. And in this, we'll keep the get list lookup value. And the reason why we are keeping this is because it will be able to fetch the tables that we need for our data migration. It will do a lookup into MS SQL, get all our tables, and then it will be able to supply all the tables that we need. So we are using the for each activity, but instead of using the copy data, we are going to delete that. Okay, so now that we've deleted for the copy activity, the activity that we'll be using for this class is called the script activity. So you search here, script activity. So the script activity allows us to do something similar to lookup, where we can execute queries on the back end. So we execute the queries on the Snowflake end. So just imagine it this way, that you are writing a query in a Snowflake. So this query that we have finally wrote, will be executed on the Snowflake's right hand. So we'll just write this over here so that the script activity can connect to the data factory and to Snowflake and execute the script and bring it back. So you click on the script activity. You can give it a name. Query. So go to settings. Now you're going to connect it to the link server. But during the earlier class, we created some link server. But you'll be using a different link server here that will connect to Snowflake. So click on plus new, search for Snowflake, click continue, give the name, and then click on your account. So how are you going to get your account? You go back to Snowflake, click on your name, go to your account admin, with your account details, and then you copy your account ID, which is the account URL. Go back, paste it here. And then you specify the database we're connecting to, which is the name of our database, migration work. So specify migration work. For the warehouse, you can actually say it at the top of your name. So, which is the default one, which is this compute. You can see it here, the warehouse compute underscore WH. Specify it. And then you supply your username and password. Once you're done, you click on test connection. And then you get connection successful, and then you click on create. At this point, you've successfully created your link server. And then you can publish. But before you publish, you need to supply a query here, else it will throw an error. Click publish. You can see the error. It's expecting a name. So close it. And then let's copy select this query here. Select top 10 and then publish. With this, you successfully you can test the script activity and see if it's working well. So how do we do that? You just have to copy this script activity. Let's clone it and copy it. Okay, so now that you've created your link server, you can now execute query on the Snowflake side. So you can execute the query on the Snowflake side by using this option here by creating a dynamic content. So before going further, so let's say what we've done. Yeah, so you're going to encounter an error. If you look at the error, failed to publish because of the validation error. So you need to supply a temporary query here. So you can use the first table that we created earlier and put it here. Then you publish. So now that we've published successfully, so we can do a quick test on the scripts activity. So how do we do that? So you can duplicate this activity function and clone it. Or you copy it out, either of the two, but clone it first to make it easier instead of creating a new activity. So once you clone it, let's say, call it table 1. And you copy the script activity out. And then you can delete the lookup. So you only have the script activity here at this point, so you can run a test. And then click on debug. So once we execute this activity, you can check how it is running on the Snowflake side. So you go to Snowflake, go to monitoring, query history, and refresh. Still running. So if you see it here, you will see that it's executed top 10 from the query, which is the query that we supplied, and it's run successfully. So perfect. So you can delete this. Okay. Okay, before we continue, I want you to understand a simple concept where we have currently manually assigned the column names and their data types for creating a table. We want Snowflake to identify the column name and its data type dynamically based on the files that we have. So to do that, we have to do something called info schema. So to learn more about the info schema, you can go through the Snowflake documentation and to read more about the info schema. So with this, you understand the in-depth about info schema and the overview of this, something that it allows Snowflake to understand the schemas slash and the structure of a file. So there are many examples in this documentation that you can go through. So, but for the purpose of this class, we'll get a copy. We'll get a copy for the CSV type of file, since the file that we are using for this class is in CSV format. So you can go through a lot of examples in this documentation and you can read more. You read more on it. Since our file is in CSV format, so we're going to use the format here to create our table and to create and to copy our files into our tables. So we copy this. So we'll be providing the location of the file dynamically by iterating it to the list and then creating a table based out of it. And this will select by selecting all from this, and in the next statement we will copy that file, which is the file location and then the file format. So all this will be done dynamically. So let's get started. So you copy this and go to your query. So the next statement after will be to copy the copy statement, which we also copy the file, and then it will load it into the table. So let's do this for a table first, and then we'll modify it for one table, for all the table. So you specify the location of the file and the file format. So once you've done that, you execute. Sorry, it's migration. So you can see the file format, you can see the file type, you can see the file columns, and with this query now, you can actually see every feature of the file that we are going to load, and the file location, the file type, and the file format. So the next one is to create the table based on all these characteristics of the file. So the next thing is to create a table. So you can go to info schema and copy the create format. So you create specifying the location and the file format. So we can call the table culture, which is the dim organization underscore stop test. So let's see. So we are able to create the table structure based on all this file. So you can query it. Just to see. So you execute the create command, and once you've executed that, so you can query it. So you will notice that the column name are in C1, C2, C3, C4, C5. This is because of the file format that we created earlier, so we did not have it defined. So in the previous file format that we created earlier, we have skipped the header by specifying it as true. So this is it. The file format that we created earlier. You can recall. We specify it to be true. So to do that, we remove it and do this. So with this now, you'll be able to modify the file format to read the header. So you create. Once you've done that, go back and run this again. And then you can select the table to see the effects. So now we've defined the column name properly. So you can now copy the data into the table using the copy command and specify. So let's get into that. So we can now use the copy command. Okay, so as mentioned earlier, we can execute the copy command and copy the data into this table. Copy the data into this table, dim organization underscore test1, and specify the match to match by column as case insensitive. So with that, it should be able to match the column. And then you execute. Perfect. So we're now going to leverage on this and copy this statement into our ADF. add dynamic contents. So we leverage on this copy. We leverage on the creates and the copy statements. Question. Yep. And the second one to copy. So the first step will be to create the table, which is here. And then the second step will be to copy it into our table. So let's modify this file name dynamically. So we will use the concat function parameter here, so that we'll be using a concat with string and then add the item table. So the item table with underscore here, and then the item dot table name, and then dot CSV, which is the file type. So this will generate the file type in the file format that we have. So then after that, formats, then we'll do the same thing for the copy. And then the schema, which is a which is the migration schema that we created earlier. Okay, and then we'll specify the database that we want it to use, and the database is our migration work. which we'll specify top. Yes. So let's review this. So it picks the table name, and then it creates the file type first. And after creating the table, then it will copy it into our table. Fine. So this looks good. Then you click OK. So let's debug. As you can see, it's going to take a while, but you can monitor here. While it is running, you can confirm if it's running by going to your monitoring page on your Snowflake query history, and then you can click on refresh, and you can see the status. They are currently running. Let's go back. So it's still in progress. So you can see, keep refreshing. So it is creating each table, and then it is loading after. So once you wait for everything to complete, you can check the results. You will notice that majority of our tables are successful, but we have few fails. So you can check all this by checking on the activity status. You can filter by the activity status. So you can see the tables that failed. So you have 3 tables that failed. So you can check to know the tables that failed. This failed. So you can debug all this, and one way is to go back to the query history. Which is in the monitoring tab. If you don't want to check from here, and then you can further debug based on the file that actually failed. Let's take this log one. This is also the additional international products. And then this which is the product. So we have three tables that failed. You can also check from the query history and filter based on the status. And then you will see the tables that failed based on your recent date activity. You can also see it here. Yeah. So once you have the detail of the table that failed, so you can resolve this in two ways to know where exactly the problem is. So upon selecting any of the query that failed, you can further debug. So this is one of the table that failed. So you can test the query that failed with the previous script that we used to load the file. Try and see the file. As you can see, it's throwing error. So the reason why it failed is because of the header, because the header is expecting more columns. Error in CSV header caused more field in data than the field in the header. So that means the header has the column has more data than the header. So either way, either the header is more than the data. So what could be the reason? So we can go to the file to see what the problem is, which is the product. You go back to your data lake. And let's see. Because of the size, we won't be able to open it here. But let's see. Yeah, it's exceeded the file size. But let's check any other file that failed to understand the dynamic of it. This one also failed. Let's see if it is the same problem. So I think this one is not as much as the other one. But let's see. So you can see the format of this. You can also check this in our MS SQL side. And see what the data looks like. You can clearly see that the delimiter is what is causing the problem. This is the first column, and this is the second column. And the reason is because if you check the data here, you can see the way it is, and all these other delimiters that are also in the table. These are what is causing the problem. Another one that we have, which is also part of the table that failed, is the additional products, part additional international products. Also exceeded it. But the best way out, if you have any encounter like this, is to go back to the extraction part and adjust the delimiter. If you go to the sync parts, and click on open, you can actually change the delimiter and select the delimiter that you want. Another way to actually get this our error is by using a query. And if you put the file name, or the file that failed, and put it in the query, you notice that where you have 3 columns, but it is running into 4 columns. You have 3 columns header, but you're having 4 columns, which is the same thing that applies there. See? You have more columns. Which is this. Go on status. It's not right. So that's another way to know what the error is. Let's see here. As you can see, we have 3 columns, but here we have 7 columns. We have 4 columns technically, but you can see the data going more than the expected column. So let's see how we can resolve this. So you go back to your data factory and the migration file. Okay. So you click on the data, the column delimiter. Let's go through the error once again before we make adjustments. So if you check, if you run this script again and go through it, error with CSV header, error caused more field in data field than the field in the header. Found the character T instead of the record delimiter. So meaning that it found the character T instead of a field delimiter, which is the comma on the line in the file in the character in the 19th row. So it found the character T in the 19th row of the file instead a comma delimiter that we specify. So if you see, it's finding this character here. So if you try to open the file, can't open the file, but we can just query it. On the 18th row, 19th row, somewhere around here. It's finding another character instead of the delimiter. But if you try to open it, because of the size of the file, we can't open it. So let's try and use the one that we can open, and let's see what the error is. Look at this log. Let's see what the error is. Okay, that's a good field again. Okay. So for database lock, is finding the character O instead of the delimiter on the column 2. So it's finding the character O. This is supposed to be the next line, but it found the character on what line again? Row 2. So it could be any of this sort of delimiter. So we got it confused. You can see a lot of comma here. Because it's expecting a comma, so but it's getting something else. So normally when you have data like this, you don't really expect the data to be clean sometimes, right? Because you have different ways of imputing our data. So you have to define the file format based on how you want your data. And the best way most of the companies follow is that they use comma, which is common, or separate comma as they are separated. So they use either pipe delimiter or a tab delimiter. So whenever other character can put this off, can make your have error, what you have to do is you go back to your pipeline and change the delimiter format so that you can avoid such error. So let's see how it is done. So to convert your file type to file delimiter, so you have to go back to your pipeline. In the pipe delimiter, your SQL query, which is the copy activity here, go to the sync and then open. So in the comma separator, which is the column delimiter, which you are using the comma separator, you change it to pipe. You save it by publishing. So once you publish successfully, you go back to your pipeline. And then after modifying it, you publish or you debug. So wait for it to execute. And refresh. It might take a while. So you all know. You click refresh. It might take a while. Once this is done, you can go back to your staging area. So once you're at your staging area, click on refresh. You will notice that the delimiter has been changed to pipe. So let's go back to Snowflake and let's create a new file format. So we'll create a file format and then we'll re-ingest the data again. So where we have the file format created earlier. So let's change the file format. I'll change it to delimiter. Change it to pipe. And then we'll add escape and close field. So we've defined the escape character, and then we can also add timestamp formats. Timestamp formats. And set it to auto. So we'll create this again. Let's see. So we've successfully modified our file format. So let's try this again. So let's try to rerun. Great. Oh, sorry. Let's try and replace and ingest the data again. And then let's ingest this data again. You can see we can't see the error again. So we've successfully loaded our file again. So everything has been loaded successfully. So you can test that by querying the table. Let's see. Successful. So we can reinitiate our ingestion from ADLS to Snowflake again. Let the pipeline run. Let's wait. So let's wait. So as you can see, it finished successfully without any error. But please note that it is possible that you might encounter another error in the dialog box, and mostly it is when it has a null value, and it will show that tell you the error. That's because we don't. It's a JSON error. This is because if a file is empty, we did not create a table using the info schema, so it throws an error. So when you do that, you can copy the query to replicate it because the file is empty. So you can just do that manually. So as you can see now, everything has been successfully migrated, and we have all our tables successfully moved from MS SQL to Snowflake's database. Thank you all, and please subscribe to the channel, and let's have more data migration experience journey. See you in the next video. Thank you.